The morning Sarah Rodriguez decided to become a Navy SEAL, she was lying face down in a hospital bed in San Diego, her back covered in burns from a house fire that had taken everything she owned. The nurses whispered about the 22-year-old who had run into the burning apartment building 3 times to save her elderly neighbors, emerging the last time with Mrs. Chun unconscious in her arms and flames licking at her uniform shirt. Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt empty. The fire had destroyed not just her possessions, but her carefully planned future as a marine biology graduate student. As she stared at the white hospital wall, watching the shadows shift with the California sun, she made a decision that would change the trajectory of her entire life. The Navy recruiter who visited her bedside 2 weeks later was surprised to find a young woman with bandaged hands asking detailed questions about special operations. Most people came to him seeking education benefits or stable careers. Sarah wanted to know about the hardest path possible. "Why the SEALs?" Petty Officer Martinez asked, setting down his recruitment materials. "You've got the grades for officer school, could go anywhere in the Navy." Sarah's dark eyes held an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "Because when everything falls apart, I want to be the person who can put it back together. And I want to be strong enough that nothing can ever make me feel helpless again." The path to SEAL training was longer for Sarah than most recruits. She spent 2 years in the regular Navy first, excelling in every assignment while quietly preparing her body and mind for the ultimate test. Her shipmates knew her as the sailor who never missed PT, who volunteered for the hardest details, who studied tactics manuals during her off hours. What they didn't know was that Sarah was training for something most of them couldn't imagine. Every morning at 0400, before the ship's official PT began, she was already on deck doing extra cardio. Every evening, while others watched movies or played cards, she practiced knots and memorized oceanography data. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Jackson, noticed her dedication but misunderstood its purpose. "Rodriguez, you're pushing yourself too hard. Navy life is a marathon, not a sprint." Sarah nodded respectfully, but continued her relentless preparation. She had learned from the fire that life could change in an instant, and when that moment came, she intended to be ready for anything. The day she submitted her SEAL application, the administrative clerk at Naval Special Warfare Command looked at the paperwork twice. Female applicants were still rare, and this one's fitness scores were exceptional even by SEAL standards. "You sure about this, Rodriguez?" the clerk asked. "Bud/S has a 90% dropout rate for men. No woman has ever completed the program." Sarah's response was calm and certain. "Then, I guess it's time for that to change." Basic underwater demolition/SEAL training began on a cold Monday morning in Coronado. Sarah stood among 180 other candidates, the only woman in a sea of determined faces. The instructors made no effort to hide their skepticism about her presence. Instructor Chief Morrison addressed the class with the traditional brutality that had broken thousands of aspiring SEALs. "Look around you. Most of you won't be here in a week. The ocean doesn't care about your feelings. The enemy doesn't care about your comfort. We're here to find out who has what it takes and who's just wasting our time." His eyes lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. She met his gaze steadily, showing neither defiance nor submission, just quiet confidence. The first week eliminated 40 candidates. Sarah watched grown men cry, rage, and quit after discovering that their high school football achievements meant nothing in the face of military-grade suffering. She focused on taking each challenge one breath at a time, remembering the feeling of helplessness in that hospital bed. During log PT, where teams carried 200-pound logs above their heads until their arms screamed for mercy, Sarah's team initially struggled with her smaller stature. The log tilted, causing uneven weight distribution that punished everyone. "This isn't working," gasped Peterson, a former college wrestler. "No offense, Rodriguez, but you're throwing off her balance." Sarah could have pointed out that her upper body strength scores exceeded his. Instead, she analyzed the problem tactically. "Switch positions. Put me in the middle instead of the end. My center of gravity is lower. The adjustment worked. Their team started finishing log PT in the top 5, and Sarah earned her first grudging respect from teammates who had initially seen her as a liability. Hell Week arrived like a storm that had been building on the horizon for months. 5.5 days of continuous training with minimal sleep, designed to reveal character under the most extreme stress imaginable. Sarah had prepared for the physical demands, but nothing could have readied her for the psychological warfare. The instructors seemed determined to prove that a woman couldn't handle the pressure, subjecting her to extra scrutiny and harsher treatment. During surf torture, where candidates lay in the freezing Pacific Ocean until hypothermia threatened unconsciousness, Instructor Chief Morrison stood over Sarah's shivering form. "Rodriguez, you can quit any time. Nobody expects you to go through this. Just ring the bell, and you can be warm and dry in 5 minutes." Sarah's teeth chattered so violently she could barely speak, but her words were clear. "I'm not going anywhere, instructor." The cold was nothing compared to the fire. At least the ocean couldn't take away everyone she cared about. By Wednesday of Hell Week, over half the class had quit. Sarah remained, though her body felt like it was held together by willpower alone. During a particularly brutal boat crew competition, her team's boat flipped in the surf, sending all 6 candidates tumbling into the churning water. As they struggled to right the heavy rubber craft, Martinez, the team leader, cramped up and began to sink. Without hesitation, Sarah dove after him, using techniques she'd learned during her endless preparation. She hauled him to the surface and helped him to shore while the rest of the team managed the boat. "Thanks, Rodriguez," Martinez panted. "I owe you one." Sarah was already focused on the next challenge. "We're a team. Teams don't leave people behind." The instructors had watched the rescue with professional interest. It was one thing to endure suffering. It was another to risk your own, standing to help a teammate in trouble. That afternoon, Chief Morrison updated his assessment notes. The woman was displaying the selfless courage that defined true SEALs. Thursday night brought the worst sleep deprivation Sarah had ever experienced. The class had been awake for over 90 hours, performing complex tasks while their minds played tricks on them. Some candidates were hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there. During a navigation exercise, Sarah's team became disoriented in the darkness. The simple task of moving from point A to point B seemed impossibly complex when their brains were operating on fumes. "I think we're going in circles," whispered Johnson, staring at his compass with confusion. Sarah forced herself to think clearly despite the fog of exhaustion. She used techniques she'd learned from studying survival psychology, breaking the navigation problem into smaller, manageable pieces. "Look at the stars," she said quietly. "Forget the compass for a second. Use natural navigation like sailors did for centuries." Her approach worked. They reached their checkpoint ahead of the other teams, and Chief Morrison made another note in his assessment file. Under extreme stress, the female candidate had shown leadership and clear thinking when others were breaking down. Friday morning brought the final test of Hell Week. The class, now reduced to 43 candidates, faced a grueling beach run followed by an obstacle course that seemed designed by someone who hated human beings. Sarah's legs felt like concrete, and every step sent shocks of pain through her battered body. But as she ran, she thought about Mrs. Chun, the elderly neighbor she'd carried from that burning building. Mrs. Chun had survived because Sarah refused to give up. These instructors were testing her will, but they couldn't break what had been forged in fire. She crossed the finish line in the middle of the pack, not the fastest but far from the slowest. More importantly, she had never quit, never complained, and had helped her teammates succeed even when her own performance suffered. As the survivors of Hell Week sat on the beach, covered in sand and salt and exhaustion, Chief Morrison addressed them with something approaching respect in his voice. "You 43 proved something this week. You proved you won't quit when everything in your body tells you to. That's the most important qualification for being a SEAL." His eyes found Sarah among the group. "Some of you surprised us. Some of you exceeded every expectation we had. Remember this feeling. because the real training starts Monday. Sarah nodded, too tired to smile, but feeling a deep satisfaction. She had passed the most infamous test in military training. But more than that, she had proven to herself that the helpless girl in the hospital bed was gone forever. That weekend, as the surviving candidates recovered, Sarah called her mother from a payphone outside the base. "Mija, how are you holding up?" her mother asked, concern evident in her voice. Sarah looked out at the Pacific Ocean, where she had nearly drowned a dozen times in the past week. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Mom. And I'm never going to be helpless again." The remaining phases of BUD/S training tested different aspects of SEAL capabilities: land warfare, small unit tactics, and advanced combat skills. Sarah excelled in marksmanship, placing second in her class with both rifle and pistol. Her small stature became an advantage in stealth exercises, and her analytical mind helped her master complex military tactics. But it was during combat medicine training that Sarah truly distinguished herself. While other candidates focused on learning the minimum required to pass, she absorbed every detail with the intensity of someone who understood that this knowledge could mean the difference between life and death for her teammates. The medical instructor, Hospital Corpsman Chief Davis, noticed her dedication during a particularly challenging trauma scenario. "Rodriguez, why are you taking notes on procedures we haven't even covered yet?" Sarah looked up from her notebook, pencil poised to continue writing. "Because when someone's bleeding out in a combat zone, I want to know every possible way to save them." Chief Davis studied her for a moment. "Have you considered becoming a SEAL medic?" The suggestion planted a seed that would grow throughout the rest of her training. Sarah realized that her desire to help people, which had led her into that burning building, could be channeled into something larger than herself. As BUD/S training entered its final phase, the class of survivors had been winnowed down to 28 candidates. They had become a tight-knit unit, bound together by shared suffering and mutual respect. Sarah had earned her place among them not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by consistently showing the character traits that defined the SEAL ethos. She was reliable under pressure, willing to sacrifice for her teammates, and absolutely refused to quit no matter how impossible the challenge seemed. During the final exercise, a complex mission simulation that tested everything they had learned, Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy compound and extracting a high-value target. When their initial plan went wrong and they found themselves outnumbered and outgunned in the scenario, Sarah suggested a tactical modification that allowed them to complete the mission with minimal casualties. The evaluating instructor later noted that her ability to adapt and think creatively under pressure demonstrated the kind of leadership potential the Navy needed in its special operations community. On graduation day, Sarah stood at attention with her 27 classmates as they received their SEAL insignia. The Trident, as it was known, represented months of the hardest training in the American military. As the pin was pressed into her uniform, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the helpless victim in a hospital bed to a fully qualified Navy SEAL. She had transformed not just her body, but her entire understanding of what she was capable of achieving. The ceremony concluded with the traditional SEAL motto, "The only easy day was yesterday." Sarah smiled slightly as she repeated the words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself. But she was ready for whatever came next. She was a Navy SEAL. Nothing would ever be impossible again. The celebration that evening was subdued by military standards, but meaningful to the graduates who understood the significance of their achievement. Sarah stood apart from the group for a moment, looking out at the ocean that had nearly killed her so many times during training. "Thinking about quitting already, Rodriguez?" joked Martinez, joining her at the railing. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying relief and determination in equal measure. "Never. I'm thinking about what comes next." "What comes next is we become the best SEALs the Navy has ever seen," Martinez replied. "And we proved that this class was something special." Sarah nodded, but her thoughts were already moving beyond graduation. She had broken barriers by becoming the first woman to complete SEAL training, but that was just the beginning. Now came the real test, proving that she could perform at the highest levels of military service. She had no way of knowing that her journey would eventually lead to a confrontation with corruption at the highest levels of the Navy, or that her refusal to be silenced would expose a scandal that reached all the way to the Pentagon. All she knew was that she was ready for whatever challenge came next. She was a SEAL, and SEALs never quit. Sarah's first operational assignment took her to Naval Special Warfare Group 1 in Coronado, where she joined SEAL Team 5 as their newest member. The team's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb, was a 15-year veteran who had served multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Webb studied Sarah's file with the careful attention he gave to all new team members, but her unprecedented background as the first female SEAL graduate added layers of complexity to his evaluation. He knew that every decision regarding her integration would be scrutinized by senior leadership. "Rodriguez, you're here because you earned it," Webb told her during their first meeting. "But earning your place and keeping it are two different things. This team operates at a level that most people can't imagine. I need to know you can handle not just the physical demands, but the mental pressure of life and death decisions." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand, sir. I'm ready to prove myself." Webb nodded, but remained cautious. He had seen promising candidates wash out during their first year of operational service. The transition from training to real-world missions exposed weaknesses that even Hell Week couldn't reveal. Sarah's integration with SEAL Team 5 began with mundane but essential tasks. She spent weeks learning the team's specific protocols, studying their previous mission reports, and training with equipment she had only read about during BUD/S. Her teammates were professional but distant initially. Petty Officer First Class David "Tank" Thompson, the team's explosives expert, summed up the general attitude during a casual conversation with another team member. "Nothing personal against Rodriguez," Thompson said while cleaning his weapon. "But we've been operating together for 3 years. We know each other's moves, trust each other completely. Now we have to rebuild that chemistry with someone who's never been downrange." Sarah understood their hesitation and worked systematically to earn their confidence. During training exercises, she focused on learning each teammate's strengths and tendencies. She studied their communication patterns, memorized their preferred tactics, and gradually began anticipating their needs during complex operations. The breakthrough came during a training exercise simulating a hostage rescue in an urban environment. The scenario involved multiple variables designed to test the team's ability to adapt under pressure. When the initial plan encountered unexpected resistance and 2 team members were simulated as wounded, Sarah made a split-second decision to modify the assault route. Her suggestion allowed them to complete the mission while evacuating the wounded teammates safely. "Good call, Rodriguez," Webb said during the after-action briefing. "You saw the tactical picture developing and adapted faster than some veterans I've worked with." Thompson, who had been skeptical of the new team member, found himself reassessing his opinion. She reads the battlefield well for someone with no combat experience. Sarah's medical training proved invaluable during advanced combat exercises. When Petty Officer Second Class Riley Jackson suffered a serious training injury during a fast rope insertion, Sarah's quick medical intervention potentially saved his career. "Rodriguez stabilized my shoulder dislocation and managed pain relief so effectively that I was back to training in half the expected time," Jackson later reported to Webb. Her medical skills are exceptional. These small victories gradually built trust within the team, but Sarah knew she wouldn't be fully accepted until she proved herself in actual combat operations. That opportunity came sooner than expected when SEAL Team 5 received deployment orders to support counterterrorism operations in East Africa. The mission briefing took place in a secure facility at Naval Base San Diego. Intelligence photos showed a terrorist compound in Somalia where American hostages were believed to be held. The operation would require infiltrating hostile territory, neutralizing enemy forces, and extracting civilians under combat conditions. Webb studied each team member's face as he outlined the mission parameters. This is not a training exercise. Real bullets, real consequences. Everyone needs to be absolutely certain they're ready for this. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but her voice remained steady when she responded. Ready, sir. The deployment began with a night flight to Djibouti, where SEAL Team 5 would stage for the operation. During the long flight, Sarah reviewed mission details and mentally rehearsed emergency medical procedures she might need to employ. Thompson, sitting across from her, noticed her preparation. First deployment nerves? Sarah looked up from her medical kit. Focused preparation. Same thing I did before every major test in BUD/S. Thompson smiled slightly. Good attitude. Keep that focus and you'll do fine out there. The terrorist compound sat in a remote area outside Mogadishu, surrounded by desert terrain that offered both concealment and danger. Intelligence suggested the hostages were being held in a central building, guarded by approximately 20 armed militants. SEAL Team 5's insertion plan called for a night approach using advanced stealth techniques. They would eliminate perimeter guards silently, breach the compound, neutralize remaining threats, and extract the hostages before enemy reinforcements could respond. As the team prepared their gear for the mission, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility that came with her role as the team's medical specialist. If anyone was wounded during the operation, their survival might depend on her ability to perform under the most extreme stress imaginable. Rodriguez. Webb called her aside before they departed. I want you positioned where you can provide medical support, but also engage targets if necessary. You're not just our medic tonight. You're a fully operational team member. Sarah nodded, understanding the significance of his words. Webb was trusting her with the same responsibilities as any other SEAL, despite her lack of combat experience. The insertion went perfectly. Under cover of darkness, SEAL Team 5 approached the compound using night vision equipment and advanced stealth techniques. Sarah's smaller profile allowed her to move through the terrain with minimal noise, and her medical training had enhanced her ability to move smoothly and efficiently. The first phase of the operation required eliminating 4 perimeter guards without alerting the main force. Sarah was assigned to neutralize the guard on the compound's eastern wall, while her teammates handled the other positions. As she approached her target, Sarah felt time slow down the way it had during the most intense moments of Hell Week. Every sense seemed heightened, every movement deliberate and precise. The guard was armed with an AK-47 and positioned where he could observe the main approach route. Sarah used the shadows and her small stature to get within striking distance without being detected. When Webb's signal came over the radio, Sarah moved with the lethal efficiency her training had instilled. The guard was neutralized silently, and the team's approach to the main compound continued without alarm. Eastern perimeter clear, Sarah whispered into her radio, reporting her successful completion of the first phase. The assault on the main building required split-second timing and perfect coordination. Sarah breached through a side window while her teammates entered from multiple points, creating confusion among the defenders and preventing them from harming the hostages. The interior of the building erupted into controlled chaos as SEAL Team 5 systematically cleared each room. Sarah's role was to secure the hostages while her teammates neutralized threats, but the mission's complexity required constant adaptation. When Thompson encountered heavy resistance in the building's central corridor, Sarah provided covering fire that allowed him to advance and eliminate 2 militants who were attempting to flank the team's position. Nice shooting, Rodriguez. Thompson's voice came through her earpiece. Targets down, advancing to next position. The hostages were located in a basement room, 3 American aid workers who had been held captive for 6 weeks. They were frightened and disoriented, but Sarah's medical assessment revealed no serious injuries requiring immediate intervention. You're safe now, Sarah told them as she quickly evaluated their condition. We're U.S. Navy SEALs, and we're here to take you home. The extraction phase proved more challenging than anticipated. Enemy reinforcements had arrived during the assault, establishing defensive positions around the compound's perimeter. SEAL Team 5 found themselves outnumbered and facing heavier resistance than intelligence had predicted. "We've got approximately 30 hostiles in defensive positions around our extraction route," Webb reported during a brief tactical pause. "We need to break through their lines while protecting 3 civilians." Sarah analyzed the tactical situation quickly, drawing on her training in small unit tactics and battlefield medicine. "Sir, if we can create a diversion on the western side, I can escort the hostages through the eastern approach we use for insertion. The terrain provides better concealment." Webb considered her suggestion for a moment before nodding. "Execute. Thompson and Jackson will provide covering fire while you move the civilians. Rest of the team will create the diversion." The modified extraction plan required Sarah to operate independently while protecting 3 terrified civilians in a combat zone. As her teammates engaged enemy forces on the opposite side of the compound, she guided the hostages through the desert terrain using the stealth techniques that had gotten her into the compound undetected. The journey to the extraction point covered nearly 2 miles of hostile territory, with enemy patrols actively searching for the SEAL team and their rescued hostages. Sarah's training in land navigation and her natural ability to read terrain allowed her to avoid contact while moving at a pace the civilians could maintain. Halfway to the extraction point, one of the hostages, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. Sarah immediately began medical assessment while maintaining security watch for enemy patrols. "I can't go any further," Dr. Walsh gasped. "Leave me here and save the others." Sarah's response was immediate and certain. "Nobody gets left behind. That's not how we operate." She administered 4 fluids from her medical kit and used techniques learned during SEAL training to help Dr. Walsh recover enough strength to continue. The delay was dangerous, but Sarah refused to abandon someone under her protection. "You're going home tonight," Sarah told the exhausted aid worker. "All of you are going home." The final approach to the extraction point required crossing an open area where enemy patrols would have clear fields of fire if they spotted the group. Sarah used smoke grenades to create concealment while guiding the hostages across the dangerous ground. As they reached the extraction zone, helicopter gunships appeared on the horizon, providing air support for the final phase of the operation. SEAL Team 5 regrouped at the landing site as the rescue helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. "Hostages secure, mission complete," Webb reported as the helicopter lifted off with all team members and rescued civilians safely aboard. During the flight back to base, Thompson sat next to Sarah and spoke quietly so the others couldn't hear. "Rodriguez, you saved Dr. Walsh's life out there. And the way you handled that extraction under fire was textbook perfect." Sarah nodded, but remained focused on monitoring the hostage's medical condition during the flight. "Just doing my job." "No, don't sonri plaiv. You did a lot more than your job tonight. You proved you belong on this team." The mission debriefing revealed that Sarah's tactical suggestions had been critical to the operation's success. Her decision to modify the extraction route had avoided a potential ambush that intelligence later confirmed was waiting along the primary route. Webb's after-action report praised Sarah's performance in multiple areas. Petty Officer Rodriguez demonstrated exceptional tactical awareness, medical proficiency, and leadership under combat conditions. She exceeded all expectations for a first deployment and proved herself worthy of a SEAL designation. The successful hostage rescue operation marked a turning point in Sarah's career. She had proven her ability to perform at the highest levels of military service, earning the complete trust and respect of her teammates. Over the following months, SEAL Team 5 conducted additional operations throughout East Africa. Sarah's reputation as both a skilled operator and an exceptional combat medic spread throughout the special operations community. During a complex raid on a terrorist weapons cache, Sarah's medical skills saved the life of a team member who suffered severe shrapnel wounds when an improvised explosive device detonated unexpectedly. Rodriguez performed combat surgery under fire, the wounded SEAL later testified. She stabilized my condition and managed my evacuation while maintaining tactical awareness of the battlefield situation. Her actions directly saved my life. These combat experiences shaped Sarah into one of the most respected SEALs in her unit. She had proven that gender was irrelevant when it came to courage, skill, and dedication to mission success. But her growing reputation also attracted attention from senior Navy leadership who saw her as either an inspiring example of military progress or a threat to traditional military culture, depending on their personal views. As Sarah's first deployment neared its end, she reflected on how much had changed since her graduation from BUD/S training. She had evolved from a promising candidate into a proven warrior, earning her place among America's most elite military forces. The girl who had once felt helpless in a hospital bed had become someone who rescued others from impossible situations. The transformation was complete, but Sarah understood that her journey as a SEAL was just beginning. When SEAL Team 5 returned to the United States, Sarah received orders for advanced training that would prepare her for even more challenging assignments. She had proven herself in combat, but the Navy had bigger plans for their first female SEAL. Those plans would eventually lead her to the corridors of power in Washington, D.C., where she would face a different kind of enemy and fight a battle that would test not just her physical courage, but her moral courage as well. During her final week of deployment in East Africa, Sarah stood on the deck of the ship that would carry her team home. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, reminding her of those brutal days during Hell Week when she thought the water might break her spirit. Instead, she had emerged stronger than ever, with the absolute confidence that came from facing impossible challenges and overcoming them through sheer determination. She was no longer just Sarah Rodriguez, the girl who had survived a fire. She was Lieutenant Junior Grade Sarah Phoenix Rodriguez, Navy SEAL, and she was ready for whatever mission came next. The journey home gave Sarah time to process everything she had learned during her first combat deployment. She had proven her ability to operate at the highest levels of military service, but she also recognized that her success carried broader implications for the future of women in special operations. Young women throughout the military were watching her career with hope and inspiration. Sarah understood that her actions would influence policy decisions affecting future generations of female service members. As the ship approached the California coast, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would continue pushing boundaries, taking on the most challenging assignments, and proving that excellence in military service had nothing to do with gender. She had no way of knowing that this commitment to excellence would eventually put her on a collision course with corruption at the highest levels of the Navy, or that her refusal to compromise her principles would make her powerful enemies. All she knew was that she was a SEAL, and SEALs never back down from a fight, no matter how powerful the opposition might be. 2 years after her successful first deployment, Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez received orders that would change the trajectory of her career forever. The Pentagon had requested her specifically for a classified assignment within the Office of Naval Special Warfare Command. The summons came through her commanding officer at SEAL Team 5, who seemed puzzled by the unusual nature of the request. Commander Webb called Sarah into his office on a Tuesday morning, holding a folder marked with security classifications she had rarely seen. "Rodriguez, someone in Washington has taken notice of your work," Webb said, gesturing for her to sit down. "You're being transferred to the Pentagon for a special assignment. The details are classified above my level, but this kind of opportunity usually doesn't come to officers with only 2 years of operational experience." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She had grown comfortable with her team and their operational rhythm. The Pentagon represented a completely different world from the direct action missions she had mastered. "Sir, can you tell me anything about what this assignment involves?" Webb shook his head. "Only that it's related to policy development for future special operations capabilities. Someone thinks your unique background and combat experience make you valuable for strategic planning." The phrase, unique background, carried weight they both understood. As the first female SEAL, Sarah's perspective on military integration and operational effectiveness was unlike anyone else's in the Navy. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself walking through the corridors of the Pentagon, carrying her sea bag and reporting letter to an office deep within the building's classified sections. The massive structure felt like a maze designed to intimidate visitors and remind them of the immense power housed within its walls. Her new assignment placed her within the Strategic Planning Division, where she would work on developing policies for integrating women into special operations roles throughout the military. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being asked to create the framework for others to follow the path she had pioneered. Captain Elizabeth Morrison, Sarah's new commanding officer, was a surface warfare officer who had spent most of her career navigating the political complexities of Pentagon service. During their first meeting, she outlined Sarah's responsibilities with the precision of someone accustomed to high-stakes briefings. Lieutenant Rodriguez, your assignment here is to provide operational expertise for policy recommendations that will go directly to the Secretary of the Navy. Your combat experience gives you credibility that pure policy analysts can't match. Sarah listened carefully, recognizing that her new role required different skills from those she had developed as an operational SEAL. Ma'am, I understand the importance of the work, but I have to ask if this assignment will affect my ability to return to operational units. Captain Morrison smiled slightly. That depends entirely on how well you perform here and what career path you choose. Success in Washington can open doors throughout the Navy, but it requires political awareness in addition to military competence. The warning about political awareness proved prophetic as Sarah began learning the intricate dynamics that govern Pentagon decision-making. Unlike the clear hierarchies and direct communication of SEAL teams, the Pentagon operated through complex networks of influence, competing interests, and careful diplomatic language. Sarah's first major project involved analyzing integration statistics from various military occupational specialties to predict success rates for women entering special operations training. The data was encouraging in some areas and concerning in others, requiring careful analysis to present accurate conclusions without political bias. Working late in her office one evening, Sarah was reviewing training injury reports when she discovered a pattern that troubled her deeply. Female candidates at several training facilities were experiencing injury rates significantly higher than male candidates in similar programs. Further investigation revealed that some training facilities were using physical standards and protocols designed for male physiology without making appropriate modifications for female anatomy and biomechanics. The result was a higher rate of preventable injuries that artificially inflated dropout rates for women. Sarah compiled her findings into a detailed report documenting how improper training protocols were creating barriers that had nothing to do with actual capability or performance. Her recommendations included specific modifications to training methods that would maintain standards while reducing unnecessary injury risk. The report landed on the desk of Admiral Richard Hartwell, the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Operations, Plans, and Strategy. Hartwell was a career submarine officer with traditional views about military service and little patience for what he considered social engineering in military policy. When Sarah was called to brief Admiral Hartwell on her findings, she prepared extensively, knowing that senior flag officers valued precise analysis and clear recommendations. She had no way of knowing that Hartwell had already decided her conclusions were politically motivated rather than operationally sound. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Admiral Hartwell began as she entered his spacious office. I've read your report on training protocols. I have to say, I'm concerned about the implications of what you're suggesting. Sarah stood at attention, her briefing materials organized and ready. Sir, my analysis shows that relatively minor adjustments to training protocols could significantly improve outcomes without compromising standards. Hartwell leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. What I see is a recommendation to make training easier for women because they can't handle the same standards as men. That's exactly the kind of lowered expectations that will destroy unit effectiveness. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but maintained her professional composure. Respectfully, sir, that's not what the data shows. The modifications I'm recommending maintain the same performance standards while addressing physiological differences that contribute to preventable injuries. Preventable injuries, Hartwell repeated, his tone dismissive. Lieutenant, military training is supposed to be difficult. If women can't handle the physical demands without special accommodations, maybe they don't belong in those roles. The comment struck Sarah like a physical blow. She had proven herself in the most demanding training and combat environments the military offered, yet this admiral was suggesting she and other women were inherently unsuited for military service. Sarah chose her words carefully, knowing that her response would be scrutinized and reported throughout the Pentagon's vast communication network. Sir, my combat experience suggests that capability and performance are not determined by gender. The modifications I'm proposing are based on sound medical and training science, not political considerations. Hartwell's eyes narrowed slightly. Your combat experience. Yes, I'm familiar with your background, Lieutenant. Some people think your SEAL training was more about political symbolism than military necessity. The insult was delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced life or death situations where political considerations meant nothing. Sarah felt anger building in her chest, but forced herself to respond professionally. Admiral, my training was evaluated using the same standards applied to every SEAL candidate. My combat performance has been assessed by my teammates and superiors based on mission effectiveness, not political considerations. Mission effectiveness, Hartwell mused, as if the concept amused him. Tell me, Lieutenant, do you think your presence on a SEAL team improves or complicates the unit's effectiveness? Sarah realized the question was designed to force her into an impossible position. Any answer that emphasized her contributions could be dismissed as arrogance, while downplaying her role would validate his skepticism about women in special operations. She decided on directness. Sir, my team's mission success rate speaks for itself. My teammates trust me with their lives, and I've proven worthy of that trust in multiple combat situations. Hartwell stood and walked to his office window, gazing out at the Pentagon's courtyard. Lieutenant Rodriguez, I'm going to be frank with you. There are people in this building who see your career as an important symbol for military integration. But symbols don't win wars. Capabilities win wars. Sarah remained at attention, sensing that the conversation was approaching a critical moment. I agree completely, sir. Capability should be the only consideration for military service. Then, you'll understand why I'm concerned about recommendations that seem designed to make military training more accommodating rather than more demanding. Hartwell turned back to face her. Excellence requires uncompromising standards, not adjustments for different groups. Sarah felt the weight of every woman who would follow her path resting on her response. This admiral had the power to influence policies that would affect thousands of future service members. Sir, with respect, uncompromising standards and appropriate training protocols are not mutually exclusive. The modifications I'm proposing would actually improve training effectiveness for all candidates while maintaining the same performance requirements. Hartwell returned to his desk and picked up her report. I'm going to table these recommendations for further review. In the meantime, I suggest you focus on analysis that supports existing protocols rather than proposing changes based on theoretical concerns. Sarah understood the dismissal for what it was, but she also recognized something else in Hartwell's tone. He wasn't just disagreeing with her analysis. He was actively hostile to her presence in his office and her role in policy development. Sir, if I may ask, what additional information would help you evaluate the merit of these recommendations? Hartwell's smile was cold. Lieutenant, I've been making policy decisions since before you enter the Navy. I don't need additional information to recognize when someone is trying to lower standards to achieve political objectives. The accusation was clear, and Sarah felt her professional restraint being tested. She had spent years proving that she could meet any standard the military established. Yet this admiral was suggesting her motives were political rather than operational. Admiral, my only objective is improving training effectiveness based on scientific analysis and operational experience. These recommendations are not about lowering standards. They're about optimizing protocols to achieve better results. Better results? Hartwell repeated sarcastically. I suppose you think your perspective as the first female SEAL gives you special insight into what constitutes better results. Sarah realized the conversation had moved beyond professional disagreement into personal hostility. Hartwell wasn't evaluating her recommendations on their merits. He was attacking her credibility and qualifications. Her response was measured but firm. Sir, my perspective comes from successful completion of SEAL training and combat operations. I believe that experience, combined with careful analysis of training data, provides a solid foundation for these recommendations. Hartwell set down her report and leaned forward, his expression hardening. Lieutenant, let me make something clear. Your SEAL designation might impress people who don't understand military realities, but it doesn't qualify you to dictate policy to officers who have been making strategic decisions longer than you've been alive. The insult was designed to diminish her accomplishments and remind her of her place in the military hierarchy. Sarah felt her temper flare, but maintained her composure through years of training in controlled aggression. I'm not attempting to dictate policy, sir. I'm providing analysis and recommendations as directed by my assignment. The quality of that analysis can be evaluated independently of my personal background. Hartwell stood again, signaling that the meeting was ending. Your analysis will be evaluated, Lieutenant. But I suggest you remember that policy recommendations must consider broader implications than your limited operational experience might encompass. As Sarah prepared to leave, Hartwell added one final comment that would echo in her mind for months to come. Lieutenant Rodriguez, symbolic firsts like your SEAL designation create expectations that can be dangerous if they're not backed by genuine capability. I hope for everyone's sake that your career doesn't prove that point. Sarah left Admiral Hartwell's office with a clear understanding that she had made a powerful enemy. The Admiral's hostility went beyond professional disagreement. It represented a fundamental resistance to the changes her very presence in the military symbolized. That evening, Sarah called her former commanding officer from SEAL Team 5, needing perspective from someone who understood her capabilities without political considerations. Commander Webb, I need some advice about navigating Pentagon politics, she said during their secure phone conversation. Webb's response was immediate and concerned. What kind of trouble are you running into up there? Sarah outlined her interaction with Admiral Hartwell, carefully avoiding specific details while conveying the essence of their confrontation. Webb listened without interruption, recognizing the serious implications of what she was describing. Sarah, you need to understand something about Washington. Some people will never accept that their assumptions about women in the military are wrong. The best way to deal with that resistance is to be so professionally excellent that they can't dismiss your contributions. I thought that's what I was doing, Sarah replied. But Admiral Hartwell seems determined to interpret everything I do as political rather than professional. Webb's tone became more serious. Then, you need to be extra careful about how you handle future interactions. Document everything. Keep your superiors informed, and never give them an excuse to question your professionalism. The advice proved prophetic as Sarah's relationship with Admiral Hartwell deteriorated over the following months. Every report she submitted was subjected to intense scrutiny. Every recommendation questioned as potentially motivated by political rather than military considerations. Sarah began keeping detailed records of her interactions with senior leadership, sensing that the situation might escalate beyond professional disagreement. She had faced enemies in combat zones, but the Pentagon presented a different kind of battlefield where careers could be destroyed through innuendo and political maneuvering. Despite the hostile environment, Sarah continued producing exceptional analysis and policy recommendations. Her work on integration protocols gained support from other senior officers who recognized its operational value regardless of political implications. Captain Morrison, her immediate superior, noticed the quality of Sarah's work and the resistance she was encountering from Admiral Hartwell. During a private conversation in her office, Morrison offered both support and warning. Sarah, your work here has been outstanding, but I need you to understand the dynamics you're dealing with. Admiral Hartwell has significant influence throughout the Navy, and he's made his opinion of your assignment clear to anyone who will listen. Sarah appreciated the frank assessment. Ma'am, I'm committed to doing my job to the best of my ability regardless of political considerations. My analysis is based on data and operational experience, not personal agenda. Morrison nodded approvingly. I know that, and so do other people in this building. But you need to be aware that Admiral Hartwell is actively working to undermine your credibility and influence. Be prepared for that resistance to escalate. The warning proved accurate sooner than either officer expected. Within a week, Sarah received word that Admiral Hartwell was questioning whether her Pentagon assignment was the best use of her talents and suggesting that she might be better suited for operational duties rather than policy development. The suggestion sounded reasonable on its surface, but Sarah understood the underlying message. Hartwell was attempting to remove her from a position where her analysis and recommendations could influence Navy policy. Sarah faced a crucial decision about how to respond to this indirect attack on her assignment and credibility. She could accept reassignment quietly, avoiding confrontation, but allowing Hartwell to succeed in silencing her voice on integration policy. Or she could fight to maintain her position and continue developing policies that could help future generations of military women succeed in the most challenging roles. The choice would define not only her career, but also her commitment to the principles that had driven her from that hospital bed to the Pentagon's corridors of power. As Sarah prepared her response to Admiral Hartwell's suggestion, she remembered the promise she had made to herself during SEAL training. She would never back down from a fight, no matter how powerful the opposition. The battle for her career was about to begin in earnest, and Sarah was determined to face it with the same courage she had shown in every challenge since that fire had changed her life forever. The confrontation that would define Sarah's career began with what appeared to be a routine policy review meeting. Admiral Hartwell had called together senior staff to discuss integration recommendations that would affect all branches of special operations. Sarah entered the conference room with her carefully prepared briefing materials, expecting a professional discussion of her analysis and recommendations. She had spent weeks refining her proposals based on feedback from multiple sources, ensuring that every conclusion was supported by solid data and operational evidence. The meeting attendees included Admiral Hartwell, Captain Morrison, 2 other flag officers, and several senior staff members responsible for various aspects of special operations policy. Sarah recognized most of them from previous briefings, though she noted some new faces who seemed particularly interested in her presence. Admiral Hartwell opened the meeting with remarks that immediately set a hostile tone. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss recommendations that could fundamentally alter the nature of special operations training. I want everyone to understand that decisions made in this room will affect the operational effectiveness of our most elite units. Sarah felt the weight of his words and the implication that her recommendations posed a threat to military effectiveness. She had prepared for skepticism, but Hartwell's opening suggested the meeting was designed as an attack on her credibility rather than a professional policy review. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Hartwell continued, please present your recommendations so we can evaluate their potential impact on operational standards. Sarah stood and began her briefing, outlining training modifications that could improve outcomes for all candidates while maintaining rigorous performance standards. Her presentation was precise, data-driven, and carefully structured to address anticipated objections. As she spoke, Sarah noticed Admiral Hartwell whispering to one of the officers she didn't recognize, their expressions skeptical and dismissive. The behavior was unprofessional and clearly intended to undermine her presentation. In conclusion, Sarah said, finishing her formal briefing, these modifications would reduce preventable injuries by approximately 30% while maintaining all current performance benchmarks. The result would be improved training effectiveness and better prepared special operations personnel. Admiral Hartwell leaned back in his chair, his expression reflecting the disdain he had shown during their previous encounters. Lieutenant, your recommendations sound very reasonable when presented in abstract terms. But let's discuss the real implications of what you're proposing. Sarah remained standing, sensing that the professional discussion she had expected was about to become something very different. Sir, I'm prepared to address any specific concerns about implementation or effectiveness. Implementation, Hartwell repeated, his tone becoming more aggressive. Let's talk about what implementing these recommendations would actually mean. You're asking us to modify training protocols that have produced the finest special operations forces in the world because some female candidates are getting injured. The characterization was deliberately inflammatory and inaccurate. Sarah's recommendations addressed training effectiveness for all candidates, not special accommodations for women. She decided to address the mischaracterization directly. Admiral, respectfully, that's not an accurate description of my recommendations. The modifications I'm proposing would improve training outcomes for all candidates by incorporating current understanding of exercise physiology and injury prevention. Hartwell's eyes flashed with anger at being corrected in front of his subordinates. Lieutenant, are you suggesting that decades of successful training protocols are inferior to your theoretical improvements? Sarah realized she had crossed an invisible line by challenging Hartwell's characterization of her work. The Admiral was using the meeting to attack her personally rather than evaluate her recommendations professionally. Sir, I'm suggesting that training protocols can be improved through careful analysis and evidence-based modifications. Science and operational experience can enhance existing methods without compromising standards. Science and operational experience, Hartwell said mockingly. Tell me, Lieutenant, how much operational experience do you actually have? How many deployments? How many combat missions? Sarah felt the trap being set, but answered honestly. I completed one operational deployment with multiple combat missions, sir. However, my recommendations are based on comprehensive analysis of training data from multiple sources, not solely on personal experience. One deployment, Hartwell announced to the room, as if this fact discredited everything she had said. Ladies and gentlemen, we're being asked to modify our most critical training protocols based on the recommendations of an officer with one deployment and a personal interest in making training more accommodating for women. The attack was direct and brutal, designed to destroy her credibility in front of witnesses who would spread the story throughout the Pentagon's vast network. Sarah felt her carefully maintained professional composure being tested to its limits. Captain Morrison attempted to intervene. Admiral, Lieutenant Rodriguez's analysis stands on its own merits regardless of her deployment history. The data she's compiled is comprehensive and professionally presented. Hartwell dismissed Morrison's support with a wave of his hand. Captain, with respect, comprehensive data analysis is meaningless if the analyst lacks sufficient operational experience to understand the implications of what she's proposing. Sarah realized the meeting had become a public humiliation designed to end her influence on policy development. Admiral Hartwell was using his rank and position to destroy her credibility through personal attack rather than professional critique. The moment that would define the rest of her career arrived when Hartwell stood and addressed her directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience. Lieutenant Rodriguez, I think it's time we address the real issue here. Your assignment to this position was a political decision designed to advance integration goals rather than military effectiveness. Your recommendations reflect that political agenda rather than genuine operational needs. The accusation was devastating and completely false. Sarah had been assigned based on her operational record and analytical capabilities, not political considerations. More importantly, her recommendations were based on careful analysis of training effectiveness, not political objectives. Sarah felt something shift inside her as she listened to Admiral Hartwell's attack. She had faced enemy fire in combat zones and survived the most brutal training in the American military. She had proven her capability and dedication repeatedly, only to be dismissed as a political symbol by an officer who had never faced the challenges she had overcome. The response that came from her lips was born from months of accumulated frustration, professional outrage, and absolute certainty about her own worth and capabilities. "Admiral Hartwell," Sarah said, her voice carrying a steel that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "Never forget I'm a SEAL." The 5 words hung in the air like a challenge that could not be ignored or dismissed. Sarah had not raised her voice or shown disrespect, but she had asserted her identity and qualifications with unmistakable force. Admiral Hartwell's face flushed red with anger at what he perceived as insubordination from a junior officer. The fact that she had contradicted his narrative about her qualifications in front of witnesses made the challenge even more infuriating. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "are you forgetting who you're addressing?" Sarah stood at attention, but her response was clear and unwavering. "No, sir. I know exactly who I'm addressing. And I know exactly who I am. I'm a Navy SEAL who earned that designation through the same training and standards as every other SEAL in the Navy." The confrontation had reached a point where one of them would have to back down or escalate further. Admiral Hartwell had built his attack around the premise that Sarah was unqualified and politically motivated. Her response had directly challenged that narrative. "Your SEAL designation," Hartwell said with obvious disdain, "was awarded for political reasons as much as professional ones. Everyone in this building knows that your training was more about making history than making warriors." The insult was designed to break her spirit and force her to submit to his authority. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Sarah felt the same calm focus she experienced in combat situations, when survival depended on clear thinking and decisive action. "Admiral, my SEAL designation was earned through the same hell week, the same training phases, and the same standards applied to every candidate. My combat record speaks for itself. My teammates trusted me with their lives because they knew I had earned that trust through demonstrated competence, not political considerations." Captain Morrison and the other officers watched the confrontation with growing alarm. They were witnessing a direct challenge to a flag officer's authority, something that could end Sarah's career regardless of who was right about the substantive issues. Admiral Hartwell realized he had pushed the situation beyond professional disagreement into personal conflict. His next words would either restore his authority or escalate the confrontation into something that could damage both their careers. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, you will retract that statement and acknowledge that you forgot yourself in addressing a superior officer." Sarah understood that this was her moment to submit or face the consequences of standing up for her principles. Everything she had worked for, everything she had proven, came down to this single decision. Her response was measured but absolutely certain. "Sir, I will not retract a statement of fact about my qualifications and record. I am a Navy SEAL. I earned that designation through the same standards as any other SEAL, and I will not allow that accomplishment to be diminished or dismissed." The room fell silent as everyone realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A junior officer was directly defying a 3-star admiral's demand for submission, basing her defiance on professional principles rather than personal arrogance. Admiral Hartwell's face had turned purple with rage. He had expected immediate compliance when he demanded retraction of her statement. Instead, Sarah had doubled down on her assertion of professional competence and personal dignity. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," he said slowly, his voice shaking with anger, "you have just ended your career. I will ensure that you never serve in a position of responsibility again. You will be transferred out of this building and assigned to the most remote posting I can arrange." Sarah had known this moment might come, but hearing the threat made it real. Admiral Hartwell was using his position to destroy her career because she refused to accept his characterization of her qualifications and motives. Her response came from the deepest core of who she had become since that night in the burning apartment building. "Admiral, you can transfer me anywhere you want. You could try to end my career, but You cannot change the fact that I am a Navy SEAL who has served with distinction and honor. Distinction and honor, Hartwell laughed bitterly. Lieutenant, you have just demonstrated complete lack of judgment and respect for military authority. Your career is over. Sarah realized that Admiral Hartwell intended to make good on his threats. He would use his influence to destroy her career as completely as possible, sending a message to other women who might challenge traditional military hierarchies. But Sarah also understood something that Admiral Hartwell had forgotten in his anger. Every word of their confrontation had been witnessed by multiple officers, including Captain Morrison, who understood the difference between legitimate policy disagreement and personal vendetta. Sir, Sarah said quietly, I accept whatever consequences may result from this conversation, but I will not accept characterizations of my service that are factually incorrect or professionally disrespectful. Admiral Hartwell had worked himself into a rage that clouded his judgment. His next words would be remembered and repeated throughout the Pentagon for years to come. Rodriguez, you're the most insubordinate officer I have ever encountered. Your attitude proves everything I've said about women in special operations. You lack the discipline and respect for authority that military service requires. The generalization about women in special operations was exactly the kind of statement that could destroy Hartwell's career if it became public knowledge. Captain Morrison recognized the implications immediately and tried to end the meeting before further damage occurred. Admiral, perhaps we should continue this discussion at another time when everyone has had a chance to cool down. But Hartwell was beyond reasonable control. His fury at being challenged by a junior officer, especially a woman, had overwhelmed his political instincts. Captain Morrison, this meeting continues until Lieutenant Rodriguez acknowledges her inappropriate behavior and requests reassignment to duties more suitable to her actual capabilities. Sarah understood that Admiral Hartwell was demanding complete submission and public humiliation as the price for ending the confrontation. He wanted her to validate his narrative about women being unsuited for positions of authority and responsibility. Her final response would be remembered by everyone present as either the moment a promising officer destroyed her career through arrogance, or the moment someone stood up for principles that transcended personal consequences. Admiral Hartwell, I will not request reassignment based on false premises about my capabilities or qualifications. I am a Navy SEAL. I have served with distinction in combat operations. I have provided professional analysis based on solid data and operational experience. I will not pretend otherwise to satisfy anyone's preconceptions about what women can or cannot accomplish in military service. The silence that followed was complete and profound. Everyone in the room understood that they had witnessed something that would have consequences far beyond the immediate confrontation. Admiral Hartwell stared at Sarah for a long moment, his face still flushed with anger, but his eyes beginning to show awareness of how far the situation had escalated. This meeting is concluded, he said finally. Lieutenant Rodriguez, you will report to my office tomorrow morning at 0800 to discuss your future assignment. Sarah came to attention and replied with perfect military bearing, Yes, sir. As the meeting ended and people filed out of the conference room, Captain Morrison caught Sarah's eye with an expression that mixed admiration and concern. The confrontation was over, but the real battle for Sarah's career was just beginning. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her Pentagon office, reviewing what had happened and preparing for whatever came next. She had stood up for her principles and professional dignity, but the cost might be everything she had worked to achieve. As she prepared to leave, her secure phone rang. The caller identification showed it was Commander Webb from SEAL Team 5. Sarah, I heard about what happened today. Word travels fast through the SEAL community. Sarah wasn't surprised that news of the confrontation had already reached operational units. The Pentagon's communication network ensured that dramatic events became known quickly throughout the Navy. Commander, I probably should have handled that differently. Webb's response was immediate and certain. No, Sarah, you handled it exactly right. Every SEAL who's heard about today is proud of how you represented our community. You reminded everyone what it means to be a SEAL. The support from her former commanding officer meant more than Sarah could express. Whatever consequences she faced, she knew she had upheld the principles and standards that define the SEAL community. Thank you, sir. That means everything to me. Sarah, Admiral Hartwell made a serious mistake today. He forgot that SEALs don't back down from fights, especially when they're fighting for something that matters. What happens next will prove whether the Navy values political convenience or professional excellence. As Sarah prepared for what might be her final night as a Pentagon staff officer, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a helpless girl in a hospital bed to a combat veteran willing to sacrifice her career for her principles. Whatever tomorrow brought, she had proven something important to herself and to everyone who witnessed the confrontation. She was exactly who she claimed to be, a Navy SEAL who would never surrender her dignity or her truth, regardless of the consequences. The battle for her career was just beginning, but Sarah faced it with the same courage that had carried her through every challenge since that night, when fire had changed her life forever. Sarah arrived at Admiral Hartwell's office at precisely 0800. Carrying herself with the bearing of someone who had already decided that maintaining her integrity was more important than preserving her career. She expected to receive transfer orders that would end her Pentagon assignment and probably damage her future prospects in the Navy. What she didn't expect was to find Captain Morrison waiting outside the Admiral's office with an expression that mixed concern and determination. "Sarah," Morrison said quietly, "before you go in there, you need to know that several people have filed reports about yesterday's meeting. The situation has escalated beyond what either you or Admiral Hartwell anticipated." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Ma'am, what kind of reports?" Morrison glanced around to ensure their conversation couldn't be overheard. "Witness statements about Admiral Hartwell's comments regarding women in special operations. His remarks about your training being politically motivated rather than professionally earned. His threat to destroy your career for asserting your qualifications." The implications began settling in Sarah's mind. Admiral Hartwell's rage had led him to make statements that could be interpreted as discriminatory and retaliatory, potentially violating military regulations regarding equal treatment and professional conduct. "Captain, I never intended for this to become a formal complaint. I just wanted to do my job without having my qualifications constantly questioned." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Sarah, you didn't file any complaints. But other people in that room recognized that what happened yesterday crossed several lines. They felt obligated to document behavior that could affect other women throughout the Navy." Before Sarah could respond, Admiral Hartwell's aide emerged from the inner office and announced that the Admiral was ready to see Lieutenant Rodriguez. Sarah took a deep breath and walked through the door, prepared for whatever consequences awaited. Admiral Hartwell looked different from the previous day. His anger had been replaced by something that resembled wariness, as if he understood that the situation had developed complications he hadn't anticipated. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, please have a seat." Sarah remained standing. "Sir, I prefer to stand if that's acceptable." Hartwell nodded, recognizing that formal military bearing was probably appropriate for whatever conversation they were about to have. He had spent the previous evening receiving phone calls from senior Navy leadership who had heard various versions of their confrontation. "Lieutenant, yesterday's meeting became more heated than either of us intended. I've been advised that some statements made during our discussion have been reported through official channels." Sarah understood that Admiral Hartwell was attempting to minimize the significance of what had occurred while acknowledging that it had attracted unwanted attention from his superiors. "Sir, I participated in that meeting to present professional analysis and recommendations. I responded to questions and comments as honestly and respectfully as possible." Hartwell's jaw tightened slightly. He had hoped she might show some willingness to characterize the previous day's events as a mutual misunderstanding rather than a one-sided attack on her credibility and qualifications. "Lieutenant, some people have suggested that certain remarks made during our discussion could be interpreted as inappropriate. I want you to understand that any policy disagreements we've had are strictly professional in nature. Sarah recognized the careful language as an attempt to establish a defense against potential discrimination charges. Admiral Hartwell was repositioning their conflict as a professional policy dispute rather than personal hostility based on her gender. Admiral, I've always approached our interactions as professional discussions. My analysis and recommendations have been based on data and operational experience, not personal considerations. Before Admiral Hartwell could respond, his aide knocked on the door and announced that he had an urgent call from the Chief of Naval Operations. Hartwell's expression shifted to one of obvious concern. "Lieutenant, please wait here. I'll return momentarily." As Admiral Hartwell left to take the call, Sarah realized that the situation had attracted attention at the highest levels of Navy leadership. The Chief of Naval Operations wouldn't be calling about routine personnel matters. 20 minutes later, Admiral Hartwell returned to his office with an expression that had transformed from wariness to barely controlled anger. The phone call had clearly not gone well for him. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, it appears that yesterday's discussion has generated more interest than anticipated. I've been directed to suspend any personnel actions regarding your assignment pending review by higher authority." Sarah understood that Admiral Hartwell was being prevented from carrying out his threat to transfer her and damage her career. Someone with more authority had intervened on her behalf. "Sir, I'm prepared to continue my assigned duties while any review takes place." Hartwell's response was clipped and formal. "Your current assignment will continue unchanged. However, I want to make it clear that this situation has created complications that neither of us should have allowed to develop." The attempt to share blame for what had occurred was transparent and unsuccessful. Sarah had done nothing more than defend her professional qualifications and personal dignity when they were attacked. "Admiral, I regret that our professional disagreement became contentious. My intention was always to provide the best possible analysis and recommendations." Admiral Hartwell dismissed her without further conversation, but Sarah could see in his expression that he understood the situation had moved beyond his control. Other people were now involved, and some of them had very different perspectives on what had occurred. Over the following weeks, Sarah continued her Pentagon assignment, while an investigation proceeded behind the scenes. She learned through informal channels that multiple officers who had witnessed the confrontation had provided statements describing Admiral Hartwell's behavior and comments. Captain Morrison kept Sarah informed about developments without violating confidentiality requirements. The investigation is being conducted at a level well above Admiral Hartwell's authority. People are taking this seriously. "Ma'am, what exactly are they investigating?" Morrison chose her words carefully. "Whether certain statements and actions violated policies regarding equal treatment and professional conduct. Whether threats of retaliation were made against an officer for asserting legitimate professional qualifications." The investigation gained momentum when investigators discovered a pattern of similar behavior by Admiral Hartwell toward other female officers throughout his career. Sarah's confrontation had prompted a comprehensive review that revealed systematic bias and discriminatory treatment spanning multiple assignments. Lieutenant Commander Jennifer Walsh, a surface warfare officer who had served under Admiral Hartwell 2 years earlier, provided testimony about remarks he had made questioning whether women belonged in combat roles. Her statement included specific quotes that demonstrated a pattern of bias rather than isolated incidents. "Admiral Hartwell told me that women in the Navy were fine for administrative roles, but that combat positions should be reserved for men who understood what real military service required," Walsh testified. "When I disagreed, he questioned my loyalty to military tradition." Similar statements from other officers painted a picture of systematic discrimination that had been overlooked or ignored because of Admiral Hartwell's rank and influence. Sarah's refusal to accept his characterization of her qualifications had exposed problems that went far beyond a single contentious meeting. The breakthrough in the investigation came when investigators examined Admiral Hartwell's communications and discovered evidence that he had been actively working to undermine integration policies at multiple levels throughout the Navy. Email records showed that he had coordinated with other senior officers to resist implementation of policies designed to expand opportunities for women in military service. Some of the language used in these communications was explicitly discriminatory and violated multiple Navy regulations. Captain Morrison briefed Sarah on these developments during a private meeting in her office. "Sarah, what you experienced wasn't isolated misconduct. It was part of a systematic effort to resist integration policies through official and unofficial channels." Sarah felt validation, but also sadness that other women had experienced similar treatment. "Ma'am, how many people were affected by this behavior?" Morrison's expression was grim. "The investigation has identified potential violations affecting dozens of female officers over a period of years. Your willingness to stand up to Admiral Hartwell opened the door for others to come forward with their own experiences." The investigation concluded 6 weeks after Sarah's confrontation with Admiral Hartwell. The findings were devastating for the Admiral and vindicated Sarah's decision to defend her professional qualifications and personal dignity. Admiral Hartwell was found to have violated multiple Navy regulations regarding equal treatment, professional conduct, and abuse of authority. The investigation determined that his treatment of female officers showed clear bias that affected personnel decisions and policy recommendations. Most damaging was evidence that he had used his position to retaliate against officers who challenged his views on integration policies. Sarah's case was the most dramatic example, but investigators found other instances where careers had been damaged through similar abuse of authority. The consequences for Admiral Hartwell were swift and comprehensive. He was relieved of his position, formally censured, and forced to retire from the Navy with reduced benefits. The investigation's findings were distributed throughout Navy leadership as an example of conduct that would not be tolerated. Sarah learned about Admiral Hartwell's downfall through Captain Morrison, who delivered the news with obvious satisfaction. "Sarah, I want you to know that your courage in standing up for your principles has changed things for a lot of people. The Navy has been forced to confront problems that were allowed to fester for too long." The vindication felt good, but Sarah was more focused on the broader implications of what had occurred. "Ma'am, what happens now? How do we ensure this kind of systematic bias doesn't continue in other forms?" Morrison smiled at the question. "That's exactly why your assignment here is more important than ever. You've proven that policies protecting equal treatment aren't just words on paper. They have real meaning and real consequences when they're violated." Sarah's role in exposing Admiral Hartwell's misconduct earned her recognition throughout the Navy leadership. Officers who had previously been cautious about supporting integration policies became vocal advocates for change. The Secretary of the Navy personally commended Sarah for her professional courage and announced new initiatives to strengthen policies protecting equal treatment for all service members regardless of gender. Lieutenant Rodriguez exemplifies the courage and professionalism that define our Navy, the Secretary stated during a Pentagon ceremony. Her willingness to defend her qualifications and dignity has strengthened our institution and reaffirmed our commitment to equal opportunity for all who serve. Sarah's training recommendations, which had been dismissed by Admiral Hartwell, were implemented throughout special operations training facilities with remarkable success. Injury rates decreased substantially while performance standards remained unchanged, validating her analysis and professional competence. Commander Webb attended the ceremony honoring Sarah's contribution to Navy policy development. Afterward, he approached her with obvious pride in his voice. "Sarah, you've done something that goes far beyond individual achievement. You've proven that moral courage is just as important as physical courage, and that standing up for principles can change entire institutions." Sarah felt humbled by the recognition, but remained focused on the work that still needed to be done. "Sir, this was never about personal vindication. It was about ensuring that capability and character are the only qualifications that matter in military service." Webb nodded approvingly. "That's exactly why you're the right person to continue this work. You understand that true strength comes from defending principles, not just yourself." Over the months following Admiral Hartwell's downfall, Sarah watched as the Navy implemented comprehensive reforms designed to prevent future discrimination and